Hi there, bonsai lovers. Welcome to the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and your company is greatly appreciated as always. Now, as I'm recording this podcast, I'm in a beautiful part of the world. I'm in Queenstown, New Zealand, which, if you've never been here, my God, if you love trees and nature, this is seriously the Mecca. It is such a beautiful, pristine, crystal clear place. It's chilly. It's very, very cold, but my God, you look up, you'll see, starting from the lakes at the bottom, you'll go up these ragged cliffs, mountains where there's just the most magnificent forests, and behind that you've got snow-capped mountains. And it's like everywhere you look is like a postcard. And for me, just walking around the local area, around the town of Queenstown, having a look, there's just some enormous sequoia they've got planted here, Doug firs that are bigger than I've ever seen. And it's all in the parks that they have here. So it's quite a special place. There's a lot of non-native trees around the place here, which is a bit of an issue for them. But my God, it's just magnificent. It's just beautiful. Everywhere you look, it's just snow-capped mountains and lakes. And the air is so clear and fresh. Anyway, welcome to the podcast. I want to talk about a few things today. I want to talk about when the scars from your past affect your future. So I've got a few stories about me and things that have been talked about with me. Plus, we're also heading towards the deepest, darkest part of the year, that winter period where we get some pretty cold temperatures. Lucky in Melbourne, we don't get that much below freezing normally, but things change quite drastically these days with temperatures. So I want to talk about strategy for winter protection too, just to help you classify your trees and maybe a few things you should do around the yard. So let's get into it, eh? So in our bonsai life, we all have mishaps. We all have stories, especially early days, but not only necessarily the early days. Things go wrong with when you're looking after something that's a living thing, and possibly you're making innocent mistakes, or things aren't quite as good as what they could be, or it might be that the tree that you're working with may have inherently some kind of issue with it when you acquire it. And it's, as I've said before, it's really not your fault. It's just on the downhill decline. You try and stop it, but sometimes you just can't. And that's where you get this little emotional scar, this little burn, a bonsai burn that sticks with you, that has an impact on what you do in the future and how you look after, or what you do acquiring new trees, or how you look after trees. And sometimes it's enough to make you throw your hands in the air and say, well, this is all just too hard. I've been there. I remember being so frustrated with doing the wrong thing. I look back now and just wish that there was access to information that we have these days that was so easily available. That the resources were there then, and the, for want of a better word, the carnage that I inflicted just wouldn't have happened. There's no way it would have happened. Like I hang my head in shame and think, really just, I look at how I do things now and think it's so easy. It's not that hard. It's not that complex. Why was it overcomplicated? And, bonsai was always that mystical thing to me where, only special people with special access to information or skills that are way beyond my skill set could look after, whereas it's not true. There's a technique and a process and a pattern for looking after your trees that you have to maintain in order to get them from one step to the next. And things have got definitely better over time. We've got access to far better materials now for I'm talking about soil mediums and stuff like that. We've got access to learning better techniques a lot easier. We've got access to information. So yeah, that's my caveat to say we've all got to be able to move on. But there are scars. There are things that stick with you. And in particular, I want to talk about this one because, as I said earlier in the intro, in Queenstown, walking around, there's beautiful trees. And I came across this one magnificent tree, just absolutely beautiful. It's heart of winter here, so there was no foliage on it. completely barren. I looked and went, that is just such a beautiful tree, and it's a larch. Now, anyone that knows me personally or has done any workshops with me or has ever bought a larch to any of my workshops, they will know my feeling on larch. And that's why I thought I'd talk about the scars from the past, because I am definitely 100% scarred by larch. They are a beautiful tree. I love them. I really do. Hand on heart, I would love to have a larch in my collection. But you have to learn things sometimes, and for me, being a little stubborn at times, learning the hard way is often the only way that I seem to learn things, especially as a kid growing up. But larch love the colder climates. They just don't love Melbourne summers where I live. And a couple of days in that extreme heat, no matter what I seem to do, having it in the environment and not doing the right thing by the tree just killed it. It just could not survive. So, that for me is a real scar that I sometimes inflict on others when I pass out information. Oh, no, don't ever get a larch in Melbourne. They'll die, the heat, whatever. And I try and do it from a positive point of view. I try and make them well aware of that there is an issue with them and that you need to maybe manage them a little bit differently. But sometimes for me, it really opened my eyes that one particular tree that I really loved, and I had it for a very short period of time. It looked beautiful, looked magnificent, but it was not a long-term proposition for me in my climate. It also taught me a lesson that you're restricted on what you should get. And I've talked about looking at natives that grow in your local area that maybe seem a bit on the boring side, but they're going to do really well in your environment. And often the things that you want, you just can't have. If you live in the tropics, more often than not, you can't have conifers that need cold climate to survive long term, that need that dormancy. It might be something like smaller pots, for instance. There's a lot of people that are scarred by putting a tree into a pot that's small, that I would say would be normally, perfect for the tree. But then, maybe the root system hasn't built up properly. They haven't adjusted their watering system. They, whatever it is, their care system isn't in place for a smaller pot, and therefore, disaster strikes, a scar is inflicted, and then from then on, that person never again uses a smaller pot. They're always in a pot that is way too big for that tree, and it might be years down the track where their personal skill set for care of their trees and their bonsai knowledge is so much better, but that scar is deep, and for something which may have happened a long time ago, there's no way of being able to adjust. But I've got to tell you, sometimes you need to be able to move on. Like I think every opportunity, and this sounds a bit dicky, but every opportunity where there's a failure is an opportunity to learn. I heard that my whole life. Going through school, when you get your test grades back and you look at them and they're like, that's an opportunity to learn. It's like, no, it's not. That's a kick in the guts. That's what that is. But seriously, like I think with your trees, if you can look at where things maybe didn't go right and why things happened. For me, the larch, it's just a physical thing. It's an environmental thing. And once something falls into that environmental classification of anything going wrong, once it's an environmental issue, I can't control that. That's in my scope of care. Like, I can't create an artificial environment. I don't want to create an artificial environment just to keep certain species. You go to where our national collection is in Canberra, and the National Bonsai and Pension Collection of Australia, they have different species of all kinds. They have, they're like Noah's Ark. They have sort of one of everything, which is beautiful. It's great. But they also have an area for ficus, and ficus, as most people know, love warmer climates, humid climates, and they have a special room designed where they can keep their ficus so they thrive in that environment for whatever period of time that they're with the collection. So they're in an artificial environment so that visitors come along and they can see them. They don't want them to walk in and go, oh, okay, Canberra's, extremely cold in the winter months and we can't keep these species. Like, oh, okay, so you're meant to be a national collection. You've got to represent trees from every corner of our beautiful country. So you have to have an environment, an artificial environment that can manage that. In your own bonsai backyard area, I don't think it's possibly the best way to spend your time and allocate resources to make that artificial environment. Of course, there's nothing stopping you, but I don't think that that's what I would suggest. As it's difficult to manage, and these guys at the collection are the best of the best, and they know what they're doing with it. But in your home environment, I'm not saying that, for me, like, come back to the larch, there's no way I would put in an artificial environment just to keep larch. I would much rather take a trip to somewhere like New Zealand, walk around, or go somewhere to, like New Zealand, to see a bonsai collection that has larch in it and go, that's magnificent. I love it. I appreciate it. I can see the beauty in that. Am I going to have one in my collection? No, I'm not. Sometimes when you start out in the bonsai world, you have this a feeling that you want to have one of everything in your own collection. It's not always a wise thing to do. And, like I said, for a lot of people, that's learned the hard way. But, really when your scars from the past start to affect your future, I think it's maybe time to have a look at them. If, an easy way for me to do it is it environmental? Okay, lock it away, learn from it, don't do it again. Don't make that same mistake. And like I do with larch in Melbourne, Australia, I just make people aware that, possibly if you live in a cooler part of Melbourne, up on, Mount Dandenong or somewhere where it's a cooler climate, go for it. Brilliant, perfect environment for it. If you're living somewhere where it's hot and dry and dusty during that summer period and you're going to get flogged with that dry heat, then maybe it's not the best thing to do. And if it's not this year, maybe it's the year after or the year after. But if it's something that's a learning experience that is on you as the custodian of your bonsai, use that scar as a learning experience and go forward and try it again. Do it again. Don't be stuck saying no to different things when you know that what you do, like let's say taking a smaller pot, for example, will make your trees magnificent and really make them get to that highest level. Then that's something that you've got to keep pushing forward on. You've got to not let that scar hold you back. You've got to let it teach you and move you into a better place. Anyway, scars, we've all got them, mate. Now, you've heard me talk on the podcast a lot about, I love this season. If spring comes around, I love spring because we get this new foliage. I love summer. It's, nice and warm and it's decanted, blah, blah, blah. Autumn comes around. I love autumn because we get this beautiful foliage comes around. Now, winter. I love winter. But I can honestly say that the cold is not my favourite time of the year. It's not. I do love having a nice fire burning. I do enjoy that part of winter. Fire season for me is a great time of the year, but the actual physical feeling of being cold I don't enjoy. And for me with my trees, it is from a bonsai perspective, it is a great time. I'm going to talk about winter with your bonsai and especially deciduous bonsai in the next sort of episode of the podcast. But winter's a time for me that as it gets colder and as I start feeling uncomfortable, I then start thinking about my bonsai and think, okay, they don't have feelings like we do. All right, so they don't sit there and shiver away, but there is an impact when things get below freezing on different types of trees. Not all of them, just some of them. And this is where you have to really classify your bonsai. You need to go through, I think, my approach with it is cold sensitive and not cold sensitive. I don't think it needs to be any more than that. So obviously things like your ficus are cold sensitive, and that's a no. Like they, based on where they live and where they thrive, taking them and putting them in a pot somewhere like Melbourne or the southern states of Australia when it gets chilly cold, is not going to be the best thing for them. That's plain and simple. But there's other trees as well. Let's take, for instance, Japanese maple, or some of the other deciduous trees. One thing, if you've ever had bonsai for more than a couple of years, and you live in the colder climates, you'd notice that when spring comes around, sometimes you look at the trees and go, "Oh, that part of the tree's died. Well, that branch has died, or all those tips on this side of the tree have died." And the tree moves on, things shoot out. There's no real issue. Like it keeps moving forward, but you sort of take that bit of a hit backwards on the tree, and that dieback that occurs can be from a number of reasons. But one of the reasons it can be by is from exposure to the frost. I had Zelkova, Japanese greybark elm, which was, and I say was because you know where this is heading, because I'm trying to normalize when these things happen for everybody, that it's not, disaster strikes all of us. I don't care who's telling the story and how they put themselves on a pedestal for things, throughout their history with bonsai. Part of the nature of these living things is, as I said a bit earlier, is that things can go wrong. So this greybark elm, beautiful tree, really developed it lovely trunk, strong root system, nice pot. Everything was looking great. Developed primary branches, secondary branches. I was well onto the tertiary branches for this thing, and it was really starting to get nice and fine and delicate. And the branch structure on this Zelkova, with a lot of them, based on an approach to defoliation, pruning, whatever, and that growing period after defoliation to when they start to go dormant, lose their leaves and all the rest of it. It's very fine, very delicate. Like hasn't been growing all of spring, got through until summer, settled, and then autumn comes around, loses its leaves. So it's not coarse, it's not heavier growth. It's very fine, it's very delicate. It's not much thicker than a needle, the fine tip foliage. And I'd found that for a long period of time, that as I was working on this tree and kept pushing my agenda on this tree, that I was probably working it too hard, and I wasn't factoring in that every winter, things would happen to this tree, and then I would get dieback on the tips. I would just say that's par of that's the way this tree grows. That's what it is. I have to expect it. So I need to push it a little bit harder when I'm doing my defoliation, and that forcing that flush of growth to maybe not just happen once during sort of late spring, but maybe I'll do it a second time, because that's what suits me. Allowing for that reduction of foliage by 8-10%, whatever it was, then I should push it that little bit harder so I get an extra 10 or 15%. So then when I go backwards, I'm still ahead of where I would have been normally. And my logic in my head sounded sane. It doesn't sound sane now as I say it out loud and as I prepared for this podcast. It sounds like the talk of a madman who was favouring what they were doing for themselves as opposed to what was best for the tree that was in my care. And knowing that maybe finer branches on this particular tree would burn, I look back at it now and think I should never have ever done defoliation on that tree. I should have done more with my winter care. I should have picked that tree up as the weather started to turn, once it had dropped its leaves, and said, okay, now you're going into a nice sheltered spot. All right, so I know it's going to start getting flogged by that cold weather. So, yep, winter protection, but I'm maybe not going to defoliate it. Or if I do defoliate it, maybe it's only a partial defoliation, or maybe it's only once every 2 years, and maybe it's once every 2 years it's a partial defoliation, or maybe I actually have a good hard look at myself and think, why am I rushing the tree? Why am I pushing it to get to an end point? Why not just sit back and let the tree do what it does naturally and not have it go through this cycle of hurt every year because it suits me? Why wait for spring and go, okay, let's roll the dice and see which branches have survived and which ones haven't? Anyway, so it's obviously too late for that tree. It's not too late for me to have learnt from that scar. That's that act of stupidity that I sort of inflicted on the tree and just pushed myself. And it's cathartic. It's good for me it's good for my spirit to say this stuff out loud on the podcast and put it out there, because hopefully it sort of stops, in maybe somebody who's listening from going down the same path, or maybe you just see that it's completely normal that this stuff happens. But anyway, your strategy for winter protection. Now you've got that story in the back of your head. It's a bit linking section 1 and section 2. Getting on to what I would suggest you look at based on your trees that you've classified into the sensitive and the non-sensitive, because there's final thing I'll say on it, there's different levels of sensitivity, of course. Some are going to be more prone. Some are going to, struggle when it gets well below freezing. And some are going to be okay to, maybe below 5 or 5 degrees Celsius, or some are going to be, start to be damaged when it gets to 5 degrees Celsius, depending on what variety they are. But I don't think that normal yards or balconies or bonsai areas that you have can sort of be classified as different. For me, I've got different areas in the back of my yard which are a lot sheltered from the cold winds. They're not good growing areas, but they're definitely good protection areas that I've got. So I use those areas during the winter months to say, okay, for my more delicate trees, you're into that area. There's shade cloth over the top. You're sheltered on 3 sides from the wind. You're not going to get a hell of a lot of sun, maybe 2 hours throughout the day, but that's enough. I don't need you. So I plant on trees that are completely dormant, like deciduous. They're not photosynthesizing, so they don't really need the sun. I can monitor their watering there. They're not going to get drowned on a perpetual basis, so I can manage that part for them as well. So I have areas in my yard that I look at. I have my shade cloth that I start to pull over, retractable shade cloth for me, but you can have it where you knock it up with a couple of nails around some timber or something like that, or even have it where, let's say it's a particular tree in the yard, you don't have any pergola or anything, any framework above that tree that you can put shade cloth on. One thing that I saw when I was over in Japan was a tree that had a shade cloth put over it. It was in the summer months. It was a needle juniper that had been worked heavily, and to prevent burning it, the shade cloth was put physically over the tree. Now what you could do is use some bamboo stakes and knock something up at a small timber frame even around particular trees to put shade cloth over, or make a small, depending on the size tree, you can make a small framework and shade cloth that and shelter those trees away. But whatever it is, you've got to do something. Depending on how cold it gets where you are, greenhouses with warming beds may be the way to go. I know a lot of our bonsai friends over in the States where it gets extremely cold during the winter. Their warming beds are essential, for the trees to prevent them going solid, freezing to a block. It might be that under a bench is a good option. And that definitely works for me too, where some trees that maybe aren't quite as sensitive, that I can't get into that sheltered area, maybe they're too big, whatever it is, those trees can often go underneath the benches. So when that frost comes down, when I know there's a frost warning, a grazier's warning for frost in my particular area, I know that I can take those trees and pop them under a bench and know that frost isn't going to come down and burn the structure of the tree. It's a more sheltered way of looking after the tree. You could have it that they go under a tree, a big garden tree that you've got, even if it's let's say it's a big deciduous thing. Even having that branching structure above will prevent the frost from coming straight down and settling onto the tree. So you can move it under maybe some bigger trees as well. But what I suppose I'm getting to is there's got to be a strategy for protection or sheltering or caring for the more sensitive species. Take them indoors. It might be that you've only got a few trees and you look outside and you look at the forecast and it's going to be for completely freezing weather where, take the tree inside, put it into the laundry, put it into the garage, whatever it is, shelter it. Next day, take it back out, put it back out on the bench. I find that particularly where I live, these colder spells, they come and they go. It's not always going to be like that. Most nights there's cloud cover, so we don't get below freezing. it's only on those cool, clear nights where there's zero wind that there's that frost warning, and that's when I get out there and say, okay, so I've tagged all these trees. These trees in my collection are delicate, or they're sensitive, cold sensitive, so therefore I need to do something with these. And some may live permanently during that period. My big ficus, that lives permanently into a more sheltered area, but other trees, they might come in and go out of that protection area depending on what the weather is. Or, so you've got into patios, pergolas, places where, normally I'd say don't put your trees because they're not going to get any exposure to the elements. They're perfect. That exposure to the elements is what can have a bit of a negative impact on the trees. So having a strategy, looking around your yard, seeing what you can do best, temporary structures, building a temporary frame for your trees, but getting your trees into that category. Things like my pines, they love the exposure to the cold. They love, and there's no way I would ever move any of my pines. And a lot of my deciduous trees that are from cold environments, my oak and beech, that sort of thing, I'm not going to move those around. But if you do get something that's more delicate, if you do go through that experience, like I said earlier, with that perpetual dieback every spring that you see on the branches on a particular variety, then put into that cold sensitive category and just make sure that you take steps to ensure it. Sometimes overseas I've heard of people putting trees under benches and then stacking up mulch around the trees as well to prevent the pots from freezing, because the earth is warmer than the air around it. So there's definitely different strategies we can take, but it's got to be something which is appropriate to your bonsai area and also to the trees that you're maintaining, as well as the climate that your trees have to live in. So we're getting there, we're getting colder, but now's a great time to take action to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your trees as we get towards the colder period. Thank you for your company, tree lovers, bonsai lovers. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you come on board and listen to yet another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I do love it. I see the stats coming through for the podcast and the views, and it's fantastic that this and the kind encouraging words from you as well. That's really nice, and hopefully you are getting some benefit out of this for your trees in more ways than one. For me, I hope it makes you just spend some time with them, pick up your scissors, and do that work on them, and really take them to the next level and love them. As maybe 1% as much as what I love my trees, because it's a brilliant thing having bonsai. So I do appreciate the company. We are heading into the quieter period. Well, quieter for now. There's the work should be starting to ease up a little bit, unless you've got pines. You'll find if you've got a lot of pines, you should be busy. If you've only got a few, then hopefully you've done them already and you're getting towards a bit of a lull. But don't take your foot off the gas, because we've got repotting literally just around the corner. So it's going to be frantic in a few weeks' time, and the things are going to start ramping up. Obviously, your repotting time doesn't depend on me and what I say. It depends on you, and there'll be lots to talk about repotting, but just get your head around the fact that repotting starts just before your trees wake up from dormancy. So if you've got an extended dormant period, you're in a cooler area, then repotting starts a bit later. If you're in a warmer area and your trees start to wake up a little bit earlier, then your repotting cycle is on the earlier side. So get yourself ready. Always be prepared. Always be the Boy Scout and make sure that you've got exactly what you need before you need it. Don't go hunting for things after it's too late. So anyway, thank you very much for your company. I do appreciate it as always. Give your trees a cuddle for me and make sure that they are getting exactly what they need, and you get your boost of some bonsai love back from them. Thanks for listening in. Until next time, as always, happy bonsai.